How do you see the technology playing a role in bringing those teams together?
It means that we don't have a flat structure anymore. So the way that the data architecture of, let's say, Salesforce is done is that we have a separation between the who owns the person, what was the donation channel in which it was given, the cash check, and which campaign brought it in. And so it means that we have that ability to do really good reporting, slicing and dicing. And as an organization changes the business structure, we don't have to change the underlying data. All the underlying data is there. We're simply applying a new lens over the top. And so more and more, we're seeing our clients taking on a data analyst or those type of roles where they're using Tableau over the top to try and really dissect that data. And it means that those good, meaningful reports can go to the management team to measure performance. I think historically, the fundraising systems that existed, very hard to get data out of it, very static in their approach, and we couldn't do that slicing and dicing easily. And because reporting was so difficult, it was actually easier to send all the data into the finance system and let finance drive reporting. But of course, then finance is reviewing everything on a cost center basis, as opposed to different dimensions necessarily. Not to say it's deliberate, it's not bad intention. It's just simply the way that a lot of the finance systems have been set up. And so I think, the modern world is to say, hey, let finance focus on finance and financial reporting and yes, cost center management. But how do we do a lot of the KPI measurement more out of CRM because all the data is there in good structures that allows where we can use standard reporting or business intelligence tools to be able to extract and understand what we're seeing from a performance, our behaviors, the segments.
Yeah, that's a great point. Your finance system is often the truest source of truth in a nonprofit because that's where the dollars get counted. But you're right, you have all of these other systems in most nonprofits. You may have peer-to-peer applications that are sitting over there. You may have an email marketing tool sitting over there. You may have your agency that has their own tools that are doing SMS campaigns or outbound calling campaigns. All of those responses and engagement, unless that's reported on, you can't create a single view. You can't then analyze it and say, where have we made the impact across our supporter base? You're limited to just that financial data, which is just one slice of the pie. It's really a limited view, and it really limits the marketing and fundraising teams from being able to segment that actual transactional data to drive the best campaigns. I'd much rather know if someone has done a peer-to-peer campaign and had really great engagement and what they've actually done and how many supporters they had, than just see the dollar amount that they generated in my finance system, because that doesn't tell me that much and I can't encourage them to do more of that great work.
It's a really interesting thing whereby I think historically the only way to get that single view, given all the number of systems that you mentioned and more, was to have a data warehouse. Let's just dump all the data that we have, dump it into a data warehouse, and then we can once every 3 months, every 6 months, analyze it, extract it, create segments, and apply those segmentation rules into our core donor management system that will last in the next 3 to 6 months until we rerun the query again. But modern systems are a lot more accessible, where you can use APIs to get data en masse, bulk APIs to get huge amounts of records out in nanoseconds. These kind of tools exist. But also, with the data warehouse, you need to come up with a structure. You need to figure out what is the database structure that we want to have to host it all. And that becomes quite challenging to do because you'll design a structure that works for the right now, how our current team is structured, for example. But then when the business changes or you want to see a new lens, I'm so stuck because of the rigidity of that warehouse. And so then, people move into data lakes where it's just going to shut the data in. But we're just adding more sinks and more kind of technical debt in an organization to make it work. I'm really excited by things like Data Cloud that are coming out, which stitches those data together, whereby if you can access the data directly from the source, great. But of course, if you can't, we do need to use something in the middle like a data lake. But as much as possible, let's go straight to the source. Let's glue that data together, stitch it together in a model and a profile. And then when we change our business, that's okay. We just change the model. We don't have to change the underlying data that supports it. And it just means that then innovation can be driven. We can think about hypotheses. Hey, this is what we believe is true. Let's check whether the data supports it. let's do a test campaign, do something with that data, and we can then change the model or change our campaign approach depending on the results that we get.
And from a marketer perspective, if I've got Justin, who is he's done a peer-to-peer campaign, so I've got Justin with his Gmail address, then I've got his work email address in my fundraising platform, and I've got maybe his wife's email address in my marketing tool. It's really hard to understand who that person is and what they've done. I can't understand maybe even that's your wife, you share the same last name, and maybe you reuse the same email address. So having a system and even a data warehouse, it struggles to do that kind of matching where I can really form one true identity, or the golden record concept for Justin and for his family. So that's where a platform like Data Cloud really plays a massive role in just stitching those different identities across those different systems together, so that when I do automate my marketing to them and I want to personalize the messaging en masse, I can do it with confidence. I don't have to worry. I don't want to say too much because I may get it wrong. I may say, oh, Justin, thank you for your first and only donation last month. It's great that we have you as a new supporter to our charity, but you've been donating through your wife for the last 10 years, or maybe just with a different email address. So this concept of throwing data into a data lake and building a segment, it's not good enough for marketers to truly do their job with trust again.
And it's too late too. In many cases, we've heard scenarios where someone didn't meet, let's say, the major gift threshold during the time that the query was run. But because the next query is run 6 months later, when they make a donation that finally pushes them over the major giving threshold, needs another 6 months to pass before they get at it. And so it's not real time enough for the organization to really recognize those amazing people that are supporting them. But look, this whole concept of stitching it all together, it's got so many applications, right? Like we've got marketing, but you've got your analytics that you need to be able to do over the top to make those right informed strategic business decisions. But you've also got generative AI. And I know that it's still a bit like, how's that going to work? But geez, can you imagine that we stitch together that profile and we know all the different variants of that individual on that one individual profile, where we can then now generate that personalized letter? It all goes back to that first point we talked about. We need really hyper personalization communications, interactions and the like to make it possible for us to show we know them and we care for them and we have our client, our donors, our volunteers, our supporters' best interests.
Absolutely. I like to think about personalization from a very one-to-one perspective. Like imagine if you had a nonprofit and you just had the one supporter, how would you treat them? That's how you'd want to treat a supporter in an organization that has millions of supporters, is really knowing them, knowing their interests, knowing why they donate, knowing the history of all of the support they've provided and everything they've ever done for you. Knowing everything about them allows you to have a very personal and empathetic conversation with them. And it's empathetic because you're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall at them and they're not receiving this comm that's like, hey, first name, like, thank you for your support. Please support us some more. And that's it. Like you do want to have a very personal conversation. With AI, generative AI, it is going to allow a very human conversation to happen, but the data needs to be correct for AI to use. If the data is not correct, the foundations aren't right, AI is going to spit out some stuff that you may not trust that generative process as much as if you had the data all in order, ready for it to consume. A generative AI won't fix the data problem. It may help it, it may enrich it, but it's really up to the organization to get their data right before they start doing heavy generative AI content.
Yeah, it's not just about getting the data right. It's kind of really strong business rules as to, we talk about this stitching together of the multiple identities into one profile, but maybe someone doesn't want that. For example, for me, I like to keep my personal person separate to my business person, even with the same vendor in some cases, because that's about work and that's about my home life. And so it's bound to respect that individual as well through our business rules that determine, do we have permission to stitch the different identities that they have together or not? And so there's a lot of questions that keep coming up with our workshops with clients where those business rules haven't been thought through simply because they've never been possible before. But I guess in this world that we are currently in and going forward, more and more organizations would be so clear on these rules as to when do I count them as the same person? How do I unify identities in a good way? And how do I split identities in a good way when necessary?
Yeah, more and more, I think ethics is playing a massive role in technology, data, how we go to market, because you've got to consider the why and the what's the right thing. How do we do the right thing by the supporter? How do we respect what their needs and wants are? And it really isn't black and white in many cases. And the technology enables us to do anything, but what's right? Which car, like which person on the street is the AI car going to kill? That old chestnut. It's the same kind of thing that nonprofits have to start considering. And I think the key to having those conversations is actually understanding. It's understanding the customer at the end of it, but it's also understanding the capability of the technology.
Actually, you raised a really interesting point there. Who owns the customer record? So, all of our clients are seeking that unified record. But let's imagine you have a person who is directly impacted by the health matter that the cause is related to. So let's say a patient. They're also a donor. They're also a volunteer. And they're also on a clinical study that they've enrolled into. Do we trust the person in that clinical study to update the details about me? Because that impacts how I'm communicated with by the donation, the fundraising team, and there's all these kind of scenarios that come about. Am I allowed to show this amount of information over there, or what's the right level? And it's really thinking through when I'm looking at that CRM record of an individual. What am I seeing?
Yeah. And this is hard to do when you have disparate systems and you've got partners that own part of the system. It's a lot easier to do when you have one platform that manages that customer data securely, and you can design it in a way that supports those use cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.